In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the ongoing tariff war initiated by President Donald Trump, its broader economic and geopolitical implications, and how countries around the world are responding. As we approach a critical point in this escalating trade conflict, it's worth examining how these tariffs are shaping global trade relations, influencing domestic economies, and potentially redefining the structure of international commerce. The current tariff strategy stems from Donald Trump's trade agenda during his first presidency and now re-emerging as a central part of his political platform. The core objective: to rebalance trade deficits, incentivize domestic manufacturing, and address what he perceives as long-standing trade injustices against the U.S. On July 9th, the Trump team announced a new round of tariffs set to go into effect on August 1st if certain countries did not enter into trade agreements with the United States. These tariffs, if enacted, would apply to a wide range of imported goods and could significantly increase the cost of doing business with the U.S. As of now, 4 countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, and Japan, have agreed to a preliminary framework for trade agreements. It's important to note that these frameworks are not full-fledged agreements. They outline potential terms and offer negotiating paths forward. Interestingly, these frameworks often require the partner countries to commit to lower tariffs for American imports, while their own exports to the U.S. may still face double-digit tariffs. For example, Indonesia and Vietnam reportedly agreed to tariffs of around 19 to 20% on their exports to the U.S., while granting American goods duty-free access. This has raised concerns among critics who see these deals as lopsided and heavily tilted in favor of the U.S., essentially resembling modern versions of unequal treaties. One of the more surprising developments is the fiscal impact. In June, the U.S. government recorded a rare monthly budget surplus, over $26 billion. Interestingly, the total tariff revenue for the month closely matched that number, sparking speculation that tariffs may be helping offset deficits. However, it's worth examining this in context. A single-month surplus doesn't reverse the broader trend of rising federal debt and deficit spending. Moreover, the longer-term effect of tariffs on consumer prices, business investment, and supply chains is still uncertain. Advocates argue that tariffs promote fair trade and create incentives for companies to bring manufacturing back to American soil. Critics warn they could lead to higher prices for U.S. consumers, retaliatory tariffs from trade partners, and disruptions in global supply chains. Canada and Mexico, despite being part of the USMCA, the successor to NAFTA, are not exempt from the new tariff policies. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has already signaled that a zero-tariff agreement with the U.S. is unlikely under current conditions. These two countries are deeply integrated into the U.S. manufacturing supply chain, especially in industries like automotive and steel. Their economies heavily rely on U.S. markets, with over 70% of Canada's exports going south of the border. If the U.S. imposes significant tariffs, some projections mention 35%, this could severely hurt their industries. At the same time, Trump's team is betting that these countries have limited options. Many Canadian and Mexican manufacturers are built entirely around American clients, sometimes with no viable alternatives. This dependency reduces their ability to retaliate meaningfully. While tariffs have been broadly applied, much of the policy seems aimed at countering China. There's also an effort to prevent Chinese firms from using Southeast Asian countries as a backdoor into the American market via transshipment. For instance, Myanmar has faced tariffs as high as 40%, possibly as a signal against Chinese rerouting of goods through military-backed regimes. This illustrates that the tariff war is not purely economic, but also geopolitical, aligning with broader U.S. strategic goals in the Indo-Pacific region. Major U.S. allies such as the European Union, South Korea, and India are under pressure to strike deals. The EU is particularly significant due to their advanced economies and historical alliance with the US. Interestingly, while the EU is engaged in difficult negotiations, with some reports suggesting proposed tariffs around 30%, South Korea has been notably quiet. This silence has led some analysts to speculate that a deal might be quietly in the works. The US sees Japan, the EU, and South Korea not just as economic partners, but as essential components of its global security architecture. Therefore, negotiations are also intertwined with issues like defense spending, military cooperation, and global diplomatic alignments. In an apparent policy pivot, Trump's team has proposed a new mechanism for supporting Ukraine amid the ongoing conflict with Russia. Rather than sending aid directly from U.S. reserves, the U.S. would now provide weapons for NATO to purchase and deliver. This move is strategic. It reduces American financial burdens while reinforcing the transatlantic alliance. It also sends a message to NATO. Europe must take more responsibility in supporting Ukraine if it wants continued U.S. backing. This ties back to the tariff negotiations with Europe. Some analysts suggest the U.S. may leverage military aid and strategic security concerns in parallel with trade talks. Despite short-term fiscal gains, the long-term effects of this tariff policy remain uncertain. Here are a few open questions. Will consumers eventually face higher prices as import costs rise? Can domestic manufacturing scale fast enough to meet demand? Will U.S. allies tolerate the pressure or seek new alignments, for example, China? How sustainable is tariff revenue as a replacement for broader tax reforms? Will this approach hold up under WTO rules and global norms? These are not easy questions, and experts remain divided. What's clear is that Trump's tariff strategy marks a significant shift from decades of free trade policy and is reshaping how the world engages with the American market. Whether one supports or opposes these measures, the current trajectory of U.S. trade policy suggests a more assertive, transactional approach. For countries heavily reliant on U.S. markets, adaptation may be the only viable option. If this new framework proves successful, yielding revenue, jobs, and greater trade equity, it could redefine the global trade landscape. If it backfires, it risks damaging the very economy it aims to protect. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think? Is this tariff strategy a bold correction or a dangerous gamble? Stay tuned for more deep dives into international policy and global economics.